everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan, and today I'm going to show you exactly how to swap out a radiator for a 2005 F-150 with a 5.4 liter V8. I'm pretty sure the other engines for this truck also use the exact same radiator, but I can't guarantee that, so I'm just going to say it's for the 5.4 3-valve engine, and if you have the other two, then you can just kind of use this one as a reference. Might not be exact. In this video, I also replaced the upper and lower radiator hoses, and the reason I'm doing that is because when you're replacing your radiator, it's because the radiator's bad or has a leak or something like that, which means it's probably old. And if the radiator is old, you know the upper and lower radiator hoses are old too. They are not very expensive, and it is a really solid investment because every single time you put a new radiator in, the lower radiator hose goes. Just trust me, replace the upper and lower radiator hose, save yourself the headache. With all of that out of the way, let's jump into it. The very first thing I'm going to do is grab the upper radiator hose. Is it cool to the touch like this is? Can you squeeze it? Is this able to be squeezed? This means that the cooling system is not under pressure and is safe to open. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove our coolant cap and set that aside. So to remove a radiator, we need to remove our coolant, and how we're going to do that is right here on the truck. Lift up inner fender liner, and you can see the drain port. You might notice I've already affixed a hose to it. That's a 3/8 ID hose on that spout, and when we loosen that plastic nut, the coolant should follow this hose all the way down into my bucket for a nice, easy drain. And it might leak out elsewhere, like directly underneath it, so that's why I kind of have the bucket underneath it. It is the best way to go if you want to mitigate spillage. So now we can take a 19mm socket or wrench, and we're just going to loosen that drain plug a little bit. Usually not on crazy tight. Sometimes you can break these off, which is super bummer. If that's the case, then you're probably better off just removing the lower radiator hose. And there we go. So most of the coolant is going through our tube here, but some of it's kind of coming out the threads, and that's okay. And we can see the flow coming out. It might take a while for this to all drain out. That's completely normal. If you want it to be, you know, as mess-free as possible. If you're in a hurry or in a rush, just go ahead and remove the lower radiator hose, and I promise it will come out immediately and make a big old mess. But if you're interested in not making a mess, this is definitely the way to go. Now that our flow is basically down to a couple drops, that's really all you're gonna get out of it anyway. I have about maybe 3 gallons out, something like that. I'm just gonna put it back up finger tight so I don't get any drippies while I work, and then I can remove my hose here. So next I can remove our air intake tube. That's this piece here, and it's just one 10mm bolt. If there's an additional bolt somewhere that mine doesn't have due to its age, I apologize in advance. When I got this truck, it actually had an aftermarket air intake on it, and I replaced it with the stock unit, which is this one. There we go. And then you can just pull it out of the air filter box, and you can just tug it to the left to get it out of the fender, and we can just set that aside. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove our upper radiator hose, and I have my special hose clamp pliers linked down below in the description if you need a set, or you can use some channel locks if you are in a pinch. I like these because it keeps my fingers far away from the spring. So I can go ahead and just wiggle that off of there. I like to just set it back to there, and then we can release the tension on the clamp. And look, no fuss. I really like that. So on these, this hose has most likely been on this thermostat housing since 2005, so it's going to be really hard to get off of there, especially because my engine doesn't have a transmission attached to it. So like I said, this hose is very old. I would just go ahead and replace it. They're not expensive, and they do like to go out on you, especially after you've done any kind of major repair. So when I find one that's super stuck like this, it's really not coming off, the best way to get that off is either have like a standard screwdriver and come in this way and kind of break the seal and go around it. But the other way, the way I usually do it, is I just grab a box cutter, watch your hands, and I just cut the hose down the middle like that. And then I can just peel the hose away, just like that, and it comes off like butter. See? See how much easier that was? So much easier. And then on the other side of the top radiator hose, we can do the exact same thing, albeit a little harder to see. we go. Release that tension. Grab my box cutter. Watch your fingers. And look how easy that was. You just remove the tension around the hose that's actually on the fitting, and the upper radiator hose just falls right off. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and remove is this core support cover. It's just held on with these body clips that you just spin the middle out of, and a lot of the time the threads are broken in there. So you put your prying implement behind the head of it, and then you spin, and then it should come off. So on this core support, all the threads inside of these little special fasteners, they're like body clips. That's all they really are. Apparently they're all stripped on mine, so I'm just going to drill mine out. Like that. Not the right way to do it, but it's going to work. Because every single one of these is stripped. Every single one. There we go. There we are. So with all 7 of those clips removed, we can go ahead and remove our core support cover. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove this mount. All it does is hold up the intake tube, and we've already removed that. So grab a 13mm socket or wrench and remove these 2 nuts that hold it to the engine. And then we can just go ahead and remove that. Now we can take off this mount that kind of holds the upper radiator hose aloft. It too is a 13mm. And we can just remove that mount and set it aside. So here is the official tool that you are most likely going to need if you don't have a large pipe wrench like I showed in my original video when I did this. And I had a lot of people tell me that I was the worst human on the planet for assuming that you might have a pipe wrench that size. To be fair, I've seen a lot of those pipe wrenches everywhere. Not to mention you don't need one quite that big, it's just the one that I had. But if you want to spring for the money and buy this tool and use it one time, you can. I think you might be able to rent this at like AutoZone or O'Reilly's for nearly free or a very small amount of money. Alternatively, of course, you could buy this tool and own it forever, and the link is down below in the description. So the fundamentals of this is that you're going to use one of these forks to hold the water pump pulley. And how do you do that? Well, you kind of build the tool, right? So you pick which one will fit. Let's say you have the 4 bolts on the pulley, and you slide that over the 4 bolts. That holds it in place. And then you grab this and put it on there, just like a socket. And then you can hold the pulley just like that while you grab one of these. You're going to have to pick which one it is for yourself. And then you have all this nice holding force with this guy. And then you can use a hammer on this side to knock it free. And that is how that is done. That's how this tool is used. So let's go ahead and show you the practical application of that on my 2005 Ford F-150. So here is our fan clutch. The video I did before, we didn't have the radiator shroud in the way. We really don't have that luxury here. There's no way to get it off without taking our fan clutch out in one piece, because this is not a separatable one. It's one big old piece. So what you want to do is grab the appropriately sized holding tool. It'll look something like this. On mine, it's particularly the 2 1/8, and we're going to slide that in there on the bolt heads in such a way that it's actually going to hold them, right? So now I can turn this pulley basically with this tool, and it's flipped in a way that you see how this bend is facing, sort of indenting, so it goes along with the pulley itself. Now, while I'm using the other tool, it's going to be important to keep this flush against, see, it just fell off, against the pulley surface like this, because if it slips off, it's really not going to do its job. Then we just slide our fan clutch nut tool onto the nut. Mine is 1 7/16, but they can range in different sizes. So you put that onto there, and you're almost ready to go. Except I want to talk about which way the fan spins. On this particular truck, you can tell by the pitch of the blade, it's going to spin this way. So if you're looking straight at the engine, counterclockwise. So you just kind of spin it to the left like a normal nut. Some vehicles have a reverse thread. And the reason you want to check that is because the way it's designed is when you turn the truck on and off, you want the threads to tighten down, not loosen, because otherwise the fan's going to come off and go into your radiator. So just assess your situation and go from there. What we can do is hold this side of the tool, and I'm going to strike this side of the tool with a hammer. And make sure everything's nice and square, nothing's just going to fall off. You can even use a helper to hold the pulley for you while you're doing this. So now, it's just a matter of keeping everything square, and I'm going to strike this with my hammer. Just like that, it's already broken loose. And I should just be able to spin the rest off by hand. And there we go. That sound means that the fan is off of our water pump pulley. And now that our fan is kind of just sitting down there, we can reach in and retrieve it. Carefully now. And check that out. Look how easy that came out. That came out way easier with the proper tool. I know a lot of people kind of question me on why I used a home setup. That's truthfully because I didn't have the tool at the time when I made the video. And I thought it was kind of a clever way to get around buying a tool. But you know what? That special tool might just be worth the price. And the link is down below in the description. So now we can take out our radiator shroud, and that involves removing 2 8mm bolts located on each side of our radiator. And just go ahead and remove the other one on the other side. With those 2 bolts removed, one here and one here, we can go ahead and just kind of maneuver it back a little bit and then pull straight up. And then just kind of negotiate it through the wires and tubes until it comes out. And there we go. So now we can remove the line that goes to the coolant overflow tank. Just grab some channel locks and remove this spring clamp. Usually these aren't on too badly. Here we go. Set that aside. Don't need him anymore. And now we can focus on our transmission cooler lines. There's 2 of them, one at the top, one at the bottom. I'm going to show you how to do the top one. It applies to the bottom one as well. It's just harder to see for you. Go ahead and rotate this retainer so you can see how it functions. And you can just push that off into the side and hold on to these. Stuff like this, especially if it's in good shape, might be tough to find in the aftermarket, so go ahead and hold on to this. If it's broken, then do your best to source a new one, but I'm going to hold on to this guy. So you can try pulling on this and it's not going to come out. What you need to do is loosen this fitting, which is 1 1/16". I don't know if it's metric, but I found that American stuff is really present in hydraulic systems like this, and it fits perfectly good, and I don't have any metric stuff that goes up that high. So we're just going to go ahead and loosen that fitting up. Looks like the fitting's just spinning out of the radiator, and that's fine. There we go. That's what that looks like off of our radiator, and just go ahead and do it to the lower one that's off screen. So we can just do the same thing for our lower hose that we did for our upper. Get that nasty old clamp out of the way. And then go ahead and position a bucket underneath the truck, because more than likely there's going to be some residual coolant left in here. And again, I'm just going to cut it off. If you're going to reuse the hose, obviously don't do this. But honestly, if you're doing this much work, you might as well just get brand new hoses anyway, and then you don't have to worry about it. So then I'm just going to remove our low radiator hose. Yep, there's some extra coolant I told you was going to be in there. So now we can remove the 2 10mm bolts that hold our clamps onto our radiator, that hold onto the core support. Then we can just remove those clamps off of their perches like that. and our radiator should lean backward. So I'm going to move these clamps and set these aside. Again, stuff like this can be kind of hard to find in the aftermarket, so hold on to these, especially if the rubber inside them is still good like mine is. So now it's kind of an exciting moment. We can finally remove our radiator by just pulling straight up and out. So here are our radiators. This is our old one that we pulled out of the truck. It is all done. It is 18 years old and isn't cooling as well as it really should be. And it's just a good idea to change it out when you do an engine, as well as a transmission in our case. So just make sure that their inlets and outlets are in the same spot. Our cooler line's in the same spot. It has these little clips here. And I would recommend getting the Denso unit. As far as everything I have found on the internet, this is probably your best bet because it's a nice OEM brand. It's not a shaky aftermarket company. And it's really nice to trust your cooling to a well-known brand like Denso, and the link is down below in the description. No, I'm not sponsored. I paid for this with my own money. So we can lower in our radiator, and you see this little leg, this little prong, that's going to slot down into the rubber feet that are in the core support for the radiator. So it might take just a little bit of negotiation to get it down there. There might be a line in the way. And make sure those pegs find their way into their homes. Might be some stuff in the way you gotta clear. There we go. Yeah, see how nice that fits in there, and it just looks so good. And then we can put the clamps on that actually hold it. So just install your clamps that kind of hold the top of the radiator to the core support. Bring it back, replace the bolt, and tighten it down. Torque to spec, just make sure it's not moving, and it's not. Oh, that is really nice. Go ahead and do that for both sides. And then the lower radiator hose is pretty easy. Just goes on like that. And if you need a new radiator hose, lower radiator hose, the link is down below in the description for you. I always suggest getting new ones when you get a new radiator anyway. And then we can just put the hose clamp behind the barb on the lower outlet and release. There you go, looks really nice. So before we put our transmission cooler lines on, I think it's gonna be a little bit easier to put our shroud in. So let's just lower it down on there. It has little slots that it goes on the radiator. It has like little fingers that stick out on both sides, and it just kind of goes in like that. And then it has a bolt just there and on the same place on the other side. So now we can replace our bolt that holds the shroud to the radiator. As far as for tightness, I would just say wrist tight and go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So for the transmission cooler lines, I'm going to show you to do the top one because the bottom one is really difficult to film, but they both go on exactly the same way. We're just going to put some lubrication on the surface here, put it in its home, and just push until you hear that nice click, and that's it. Then we can put the line on for the overflow tank. There we go. Awesome. So now we can replace our radiator fan. And you know, this unit looked pretty good and was working when I took it out, so I'm just going to go ahead and put that back in. And it takes a little bit of negotiation to get it down into its home. There we go. And then we can start threading it. There we go, and conveniently enough, it's righty-tighty for me. Sometimes they're reverse threads, so you gotta look out for that. Spin it on until it stops, and then we can get our tool. So grab your 2 1/8 inch fan clutch pulley holding tool, and it might be different per application, so trial and error is your friend. And basically the same as the install is basically the reverse of the install, so we want to just hold on to our bolts with the tool like that, and then grab our wrench. Mine happens to be a 1 7/16. We just want to hold that in place and then just give it a nice tightening down, and there we go, our fan clutch is reinstalled. Now we can place our upper radiator hose, and I do recommend getting the Motorcraft OEM ones, which this one is brand new, and the link is down below in the description for you. The arrow points backward towards the engine, then the other side just goes on the upper radiator outlet. Here we go, and I've already put back my little cup that holds the radiator hose off the serpentine belt. That is very nice to have and is very easy to put on. Then I'm going to grab my hose clamp plier tool. If you don't have one of these, I recommend buying one. They are insanely handy to have, and they make short work of these. And you don't risk chomping one of your fingers with a pair of channel locks or something like that, which is kind of nice. There we go. Just make sure it's behind the barb for the water neck. Make sure it stays in place, and then we can release the tension like that, and do the same thing for the front one on the radiator side. This one seems a little easier. There we go. Awesome, installed. I'm gonna put its coolant in, and I'm just gonna tell you right away, it's going to take a lot. The engine's completely empty, radiator's completely empty. It is going to be a lot, and I do recommend getting the Ford Motorcraft Concentrated Gold. It is the coolant for this truck. So for every bit of coolant you put in, go ahead and put in that much distilled water. That's about half this container. This is a gallon, so now I need to add 2 quarts of distilled water, and keep doing that until it shows up on the line on the reservoir. So go ahead and put in half of this distilled water, and just keep doing that. I mean, honestly, I'd put at least a gallon of each in before you even tried turning the engine over, because it's probably going to take something like 4 to 6 gallons total. I don't know the exact amount off the top of my head. So here's the really exciting part. All that work, all that effort, putting everything you can into something, and it comes down to this singular moment where you've really hoped you've done everything correctly, and if you've gone slow, you have. What I want to point out is that I have funnels ready for my coolant reservoir, my power steering reservoir, and my transmission. My transmission already has 7 quarts in it, but I think the total number is like 12 to 13. I'm gonna have to check that as it's running, as it's warmed up, and go through gears and stuff, so that will be its own thing. As long as you don't try to make the transmission do work while it's low on fluid, it should be just fine. We'll be able to start it up and idle and make sure that this thing is okay. Here we go. Okay, so now that we've put 2 more into the transmission, let's go ahead and check it again. Okay, so we can see on the transmission dipstick, it's like almost over full. That's totally fine, because we haven't gone through the gears yet, so we can do that. And all the while I'm letting the engine run, I'm looking, I'm checking, I'm making sure things aren't burning on the exhaust manifolds, I'm making sure nothing's going on the serpentine belt, I'm making sure the fluids are all good, and there's no big smokes. There's a little bit of smoke just because there's new paint on a new engine, that's fine, but if it's like big and plumy, turn the engine off. But so far so good. So now the truck has gone through a few heat cycles. I've made sure that the coolant isn't just pouring onto the ground, it's not leaking or anything. It is just a touch low. You really want it like right here, but it's fine, I can add that later. And you know, just keep an eye on it. How does the coolant look over the next couple of days? Just see if the coolant's low. Obviously you don't want the coolant to be low, you want it to be just right there, but this is okay for now, and I'll add some later. And of course, the last thing we need to do is replace our radiator cap. I do recommend getting a new one of these. This part is like $5, and it can literally save your engine due to regulating how much pressure is in the system and preventing boilovers. So just tighten it down until you hear one of those clicks, and you're all good to go. So that's how to replace a radiator in a 2005 F-150 with a 5.4 liter 3-valve engine. I actually just recently did an entire build series on rebuilding this engine. So if you have one of these trucks, there's a card up in the corner for you to find that engine build series, and a link down below in the description, just in case you might need it in the future. This was fairly easy as far as radiator goes. It's very straightforward. There's nothing out of the ordinary on it. If you take this to a shop, or heaven forbid the dealer, they are more than likely going to charge you north of $1,000, maybe even more than that. This is not that difficult, and something you could totally do at home with a very basic set of tools. Except for the fan clutch tool, you are going to need to rent that from AutoZone or O'Reilly's, something like that. And usually you can rent those for very cheap or even free. There's a link down below in the description if you just want to buy the fan clutch tool. It's not even that expensive. And personally, I'd rather spend my money on tools than handing it to somebody else for a repair. Thank you so very much for watching. If you found this video interesting or helpful at all, please consider subscribing or leaving a like. It really helps my channel out. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.